little bit of background, Mara is an economist in our business school at the University of Toronto. She teaches data courses and strategy. She also runs the Toronto branch of the Creative Destruction Lab, our program for science-based startups, where where four of us, Mara, Joshua, Ajay, and I, heard about AI from startups way back in 2012. She's best known for work on loyalty programs and organizational design. And at the conference over the past couple of years, she's been brought in to discuss several papers on using machine learning in economics. And what we invited her to give her thoughts here, because those discussions are in many ways for economists the most useful, especially for junior economists, the most useful and exciting discussions of the conference, and actually many of the most watched in terms of the minutes on YouTube from the previous conferences. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mara to talk about challenges and opportunities for machine learning in economics.
Okay, thanks, Avi. It's great to be here. Thank you and Ajay and Joshua for including me. Let me just share my screen and get that sort of done before we have any technical problems. Make sure. So as Avi said, and let me just preface this. I know it's got to be hard to be listening all day on Zoom. This is not the way we like to get together. It's not the way we like to interact and get to know each other and teach and learn. And so I will do my best to make this interesting. I've got the Slack channel open. I will monitor the Slack channel on my second screen. I'm open to questions either along the way, and hopefully I'll leave a little time for discussion at the end. As Avi said, my talk, I think, is going to be a little bit different from what you heard, in that it's building on two discussions I did at the previous two conferences of other people's papers, but they both ended up being about how machine learning is impacting sort of research in economics. In the first year, I discussed Susan Athey's chapter on this, which was one of the readings I assigned, and it is truly, I reread it again, getting ready for today. It is really an incredible piece. She's such a good economist. And she's so good at highlighting how this technology will impact us. So if you didn't read it before today, I strongly recommend it. But in the first year, that's what I discussed. And it was newer, and the economists were newer to AI and machine learning. And so really thinking about how it's going to impact us was first order. Last year, the papers they asked me to discuss weren't really papers about the impact of machine learning on economics. But it turned out the way those researchers were using machine learning, or the questions they were, or in some cases they weren't asking about machine learning, effectively turned my discussion into a discussion about, what are the opportunities for economists in this area. And so I've essentially put together a talk today for you guys with some examples, some from past conferences, some not, that I've called sort of what are some of the implications of machine learning for research in economics. And essentially, before Joshua compliments my computer use, let's make sure I can advance. Essentially, this is the question I want to spend our hour together thinking about. How does the emergence of machine learning impact you as an economics researcher? So 20 some odd years ago, people like me and Ajay and Avi were all doing our PhDs. And sort of the thought experiment I want to go through is, now that we have this new technology called machine learning, what's different about how you guys are going to approach economic research from how we would approach it? And the answer is going to be some things are different, but many things are not different and are the same. And essentially, I'm going to offer three answers today. These aren't the only answers, but this is what I'm going to talk about today, to this question of what do I think the opportunities are for you as a young researcher in economics. And these are the three answers. One, and then I'm going to, of course, go through each of these. First, new technology, this new technology, unlike some other new technologies that we studied, is a type of statistical tool. And so it's a new technology. That new technology basically expands our econometrics toolkit, and that opens up some opportunities. Some of those opportunities are more interesting than other opportunities. And I'm going to talk through two types of opportunities, because I want you as graduate students to think about what are the interesting and impactful opportunities to apply this new tool, as opposed to what is just kind of a new application of a new tool in an uninteresting setting. And so I'm going to break this discussion into two parts. What can we study better than we studied before? We used to always study it, but now we have better tools for it. and give you an example. And second, and this is the one that I think is most interesting, is now that we have this new statistical tool, what is it that we can study that we couldn't study before because we didn't have a way of collecting data on it? And machine learning gives us a way to do that. Second answer for today is we have a new technology. This new technology is actually opening our eyes to new types of questions. And so what might we start studying that we didn't seem to study before, or we didn't think to study before? And I'm going to spend the least amount of time on this. I'm really just going to focus on what Sendhil Mullainathan and his co-authors have introduced as this idea of prediction policy problems, as opposed to the causal inference policy problems that we typically think about. And then third is sort of the substantive part. We have a new technology. We need to think about what will be, or what are so far, the effects of the new technology on economic outcomes. So what happens when the new technology is adopted? What's, in addition to measuring what happens, there's a set of related questions which we're good at studying. What's necessary for the benefits to be realized, most notably in terms of complements? Given what the technology will or is doing, what are the implications for policy? And if you look at some of the topics coming up in the next 2 days, they fit into that category. And then also thinking about kind of what does the market for this new technology look like? What does demand look like? And what does supply look like? So these are the three buckets I'm going to go through today. So quick background, you probably don't need this background, and so that's why it's super quick. But when we think about machine learning, we broadly just think about these two types of machine learning, the unsupervised and the supervised. And the unsupervised is the easiest to think of. We have a bunch of X's, we don't have the Y's. And so what we want to do is use an algorithm to find clusters of observations that are similar in their X's. We don't know they're similar because they've been labeled cats versus dogs, but there's things about them that say the things in these groups are more similar to each other and different from the things in the other group. Supervised machine learning feels a little bit more like the type of analysis we're used to as economists. We're using a set of covariates to predict an outcome. We know the X's and we know the Y in some training data. We want to find the function that maps from X's to Y so that we can then predict Y in some other setting. And we can think about applying this to sort of structured data with the type of outcome variables we might be used to working with, like employee turnover, where we just might measure, did an employee leave after X months or X years? Is a transaction fraudulent? Or we can think about applying this to unstructured data that doesn't look like the data we historically worked with as economists, where the outcome might be a label. And this could be, is the tumor in an X-ray malignant? Is this document relevant to something? Or sort of the image recognition or categorization problem. So I want to talk a little bit first about this new technology, new tools. And as I was preparing this, I was trying to think about whether, this application on its own, would it generate a conference like this? Like when we invented the Tobit model, would we ever have gathered a conference like this? And in the first year, I mean, we still do, but we have the who's who of every field. That's what's remarkable about this conference. You have the Nobel Prize winners and the top IO economists and the top labor economists and the top macro economists and the top behavioral economists. Would they have all gotten together to talk about the economics of the Tobit? And almost surely the answer is no, but I didn't search thoroughly to see whether or not there was a conference on the economics of, the Tobit model. And so that may question, is it even worth talking about ML just as a new statistical tool? And I think the answer is yes, for the reasons that I'm going to walk you through. So I think of machine learning as a methodology that can expand the empirical economist toolkit. And I don't know how many of you are plan on doing empirical versus theoretical work, but it is an expansion of what we can do. And I think this expansion is valuable in these two ways. The first is this question of, well, we have a new tool for doing things with data. What can we study better than we could before, right? New tools. We get, probit and logit models, we can study binary outcomes better than a linear probability model. We get, BLP style demand model, we can study, mergers and preferences better than in some reduced form setting. So this happens all of the time. We get a sort of a matching between new methods and new questions, not necessarily new questions, old questions that now we can answer better. And sometimes those better solutions can potentially change how we think about that. And so in this area, you can think about machine learning techniques as being incorporated into traditional econometric analysis, specifically for those parts of the analysis that inherently involve prediction, right? And there's people much more expert than me who can walk you through that. There's a great paper that Susan Athey and Hito Imbens recently wrote about something like 7 machine learning models every economist should know. And so you can Google that, or we can throw that in Slack if you haven't looked at that. But essentially, we can carve out or slice off the parts of our typical econometric analysis that are inherently prediction, and we can incorporate ML-based prediction to do those. And so some of those applications are for model and variable selection, for assessing robustness, hybrid techniques that Susan and others are working on for causal inference, thinking about banded techniques, you know, as a methodology for experimentation. And here are a couple, actually here's where I have the site here, some of the papers that walk through this. The second thing to think about is, what can we study that we couldn't study before? How can we use machine learning techniques to create or incorporate new types of data into traditional econometric analysis? The tools of, you know, maybe standard regression, but somewhere we're using machine learning to deliver a variable, whether it's a left-hand side or a right-hand side variable, that we didn't have before, and that allows us to study things that we didn't study before. And so I want to walk you through, to highlight this, an example of each of these. And so this is a paper, I actually didn't know this paper before. I came across it, I was preparing, but you know, these authors are truly some of my favorite applied microeconomists. And so they've got this paper, Machine Learning from Schools about Energy Efficiency. It's a terrible title, I think, because you're not really machine learning from schools, but that's besides the point. The paper's forthcoming at a field journal in environmental economics, but there's something very specific I want to highlight for you guys from this paper. So let's start by asking, what does the paper do? So the paper asks a very reasonable research question: what are the causal effects on energy consumption of energy efficiency upgrades carried out in K-12 schools in California? So they basically motivate it by saying, when we're proposing energy efficiency upgrades, we come up with these estimates of how much these will save after the fact in terms of energy consumption. And maybe those are right and maybe those are wrong. And increasingly, we're trying to study whether or not these upgrades actually deliver the savings that people claimed they would deliver when they were being proposed. And they talk about a lot of this having been studied, I think, in a residential setting, and very little being studied in sort of a commercial or an institutional setting. And so they come up with this setting of schools in California as a way to study basically what fraction of the purported savings actually materialize once these upgrades get implemented. Okay, and so you can see good economics question, causal inference question. Obviously, this is sort of coming up with the ROI on these things, and would speak to all sorts of policy things about, should we be subsidizing these things? Why don't people take them up, etc. So what kind of data do they have? Kind of the data you'd expect them to have. They have a nice panel data set on very high frequency electricity consumption by the school. So that'll be the dependent variable. They have data on the upgrades that were made. They have lots of data on school characteristics, community demographics, and weather. What's their identification strategy? They're going to compare changes over time in the treated schools, which are schools that implemented upgrades, to changes over the same period in the untreated schools, which are the schools that didn't implement upgrades. And so to me, this is a very traditional applied microeconomics empirical paper, both in terms of the type of question being asked and in terms of the identification strategy being used. So where does the machine learning come in? And so I'm going to walk you through this, just highlighting a few key points from the paper. So you can see, and I'm not going to read you slide after slide, but I'll draw your attention to a few things. So they say we estimate 2 empirical models. The first is a panel data model that uses, sorry, I got to move my little zoom window, a rich set of fixed effects and controls to non-parametrically separate the causal effect of energy efficiency upgrades from other confounding factors. We find evidence that our panel fixed effects approach is sensitive to outliers and to specification. However, choosing the correct set of controls is difficult, as there are many possible candidate covariates, especially once we allow for interactions between control variables and unit or time fixed effects. So what's the problem? Certain characteristics, let's say changes in weather or school characteristics, may matter differently in different neighborhoods or different time periods, such that there's sort of a huge number of potential control variables. To overcome these challenges, we estimate a second empirical model based on new techniques in machine learning. We combine our high-frequency electricity consumption data with machine learning methods in order to select among the set of possible covariates in a disciplined and computational feasible manner. They talk about how they do it. In our setting, this allows us to algorithmically choose between over 12 million possible covariates in a disciplined, computationally feasible way. So what's the problem? They found one part of their estimation that essentially had a prediction element to it, right? I mean, if you think about the counterfactual, what they're trying to do with fixed effects in their typical panel model is control for the what would have happened to the schools that made these upgrades had they not. And so what they do in the machine learning approach is they say, we're going to basically build a predictive model using this, letting the model choose from these 12 million possible covariates. And to be fair, I don't know how they get to 12 million, but I'm sure we could dig into the paper, that does the best job of predicting, what these schools' usage would have been. But then they point out the identifying assumption for the standard panel fixed effects model and our machine learning augmented version are essentially the same. Conditional on a chosen set of controls, treated schools would have continued on a parallel trajectory to untreated schools in the absence of treatment. Same identifying assumption. The key thing is conditional on a chosen set of controls is the methodology they use for choosing that set of controls. And so what does the paper find? I mean, that's only tangentially relevant. The paper finds that basically these things deliver about 60% of the expected savings. Okay, so not all, but not terrible, better than some other estimates. In terms of what they learn about the different methodological approaches, they find that estimates from the standard panel fixed effects approach are quite sensitive to specification and have the estimates themselves have wide variance. They can range from 12 to 86% of the ex-ante expectations of savings. The machine learning methods yield estimates that are more stable across specifications and sample, ranging from 52% to 98% of ex-ante expectations. So what do we learn from this paper? What should you take away from this? What's the contribution of the paper is, of course, first the thing that they measure, the estimates they come up with in a new setting using new data. We learned something about the performance, the different performance of these different statistical methodologies. We get some insight, I think, into why the machine learning based approach to choosing control variables is superior. But the most important thing I want you to take away is that this is a very traditional economic question that's interesting for all the sort of reasons economic questions have been interesting or haven't been interesting, for the last 50 years. They still require an identification strategy. They need to have the treated schools and the untreated schools and a rich set of variables to control for every possible thing that could drive energy usage. And ML is coming in a little bit just as like a weapon here to try to improve the quality of the estimate. So that's sort of, let me just pause here. That's sort of example sort of number one. And the reason I want to bring this is because I'm not somebody who gets excited about methods. I get excited by methods if methods allow us to understand or answer, to understand economic phenomenon or answer questions we didn't have a good job of answering before. And so, this is an example where I think we have, I don't know if it's fair to say a marginal contribution from the application of machine learning. I mean, I guess, shrinking that range of estimates is quite important if we're talking about, $1 million capital projects to make these improvements. But it came in with the ML has a very specific purpose in its use in this paper. Let me just pause. Any sort of questions, comments now before I move to sort of the second part of the toolkit?
I have a question.
Sure.
So usually when we adding a fixed effect, for example, a date fixed effect or seller fixed effect, there's always a story behind each fixed effect. But then if we're using, for example, ML to choose all the controls and everything, then it just sounds very statistical. So then there's no story behind why we're doing this. Is it still a good way to, you know, do the controls?
So, I mean, that's a great question, first of all. I mean, I think I'll try to answer it, but I see Avi's here, and if he has a better answer, I'll let him go after me unless he agrees with my answer. It is a shift in how we think about choosing control variables from being theory-driven, right, to being data-driven. You're absolutely right. You know, so how do we feel about that as economists? You know, I think, you know, maybe here's one answer to it. In this setting, you know, we don't have theory to drive, I think, precisely the functional forms and the interactions, let's say, between the weather on a day, right? So depending on the weather, more heat, more air conditioning, the size of the school, right? The number of students, the socioeconomic demographics of the neighborhood, you know, all their feeling was all of these things might influence a given school's energy consumption. And we probably don't have sort of theory that can guide the specific functional forms or interactions that we should or we shouldn't include. And so theory is still guiding the set of variables that they're making available to the algorithm, right? There's a reason they're choosing socioeconomic, there's a reason they're choosing weather, there's a reason they're choosing other school characteristics. But for that last step of saying, what are the combinations that seem to be most predictive of a school's energy usage on a day, they are then delegating that in some sense to the model to learn. And you know, my guess is people have shown that in certain situations that can do a better job, right, than us trying to guess, especially since this part really is a predictive exercise, right? They sort of controlling for a part. Avi, anything to add? Nope. Okay. Okay, so sort of second topic in this area of, you know, new technology, new tools, is this idea of machine learning opening up access to new data. And I think there's two broad ways, probably more than this, but I'm going to focus on two broad ways this can happen. One is machine learning might allow us to create predicted values of a variable, and that variable can then be incorporated into traditional econometric analysis. And here's a couple of examples of how this might happen. So one example, this one isn't interesting, but it could be important, is, you know, you might have a variable that's missing for, you know, a bunch of your sample. You might be able to predict that value, given that you have it for other members, or whether it's people or other units, you might be able to predict it as a way to fill in missing data. That's sort of one very, I think, kind of sort of mechanical use. Another example is thinking about predicting a left-hand side variable at a higher frequency than it's typically measured. So Glaser has this example. So Ed Glaser's done this work on hygiene inspections and Yelp reviews of restaurants. And he's interested in this question of what would be the impact of various policies, you know, on hygiene performance. The thing about hygiene performance, you only get a measure of hygiene performance when a restaurant is then inspected, and the restaurant may only be inspected every few months, right? So it's hard to look at the impact of some change in policy on, did I check all the boxes, because you're only measuring everybody every 3 months. But if he develops an algorithm that allows you to predict hygiene scores or infractions based on the reviews you're getting at Yelp, and reviews come every single day, then essentially he can predict daily hygiene scores, even though hygiene scores aren't actually measured, you know, more than, let's say, once every couple of months. And that's an interesting example. Another example, again, this comes from Glaser, and again, I can try to put all of these papers in Slack. He uses Google Street View images in New York City to predict income. And one of the applications he talks about, he's saying, you know, in the US, we have the Street View, we have the income data, so we can build the model that predicts income from the Street View images. Where's that valuable? That might be valuable in other settings or places where we can measure Street View, but we don't have systematic data or a systematic way to measure income, because we now have a model that can turn those images into income measures. So this starts opening the opportunity to study things we couldn't study before. And, you can tell, I think that's sort of one of the most exciting opportunities. The second way machine learning does this, I think, and I put this in very simple language, but you'll see what I mean, is machine learning can turn stuff that doesn't look like data into data, allowing us to measure new things, right? So when we, run regressions, everything needs to be a quantitative variable. That's how we do analysis, right? But machine learning can take something that we didn't have a way of incorporating in econometric analysis before, turn it into a quantitative variable, and then we can study it. So 2 examples here, and there's others, is taking a newspaper article and coding up the slant of that article. Gans, and Shapiro do this. Another, and this is the one I'll talk more about because this is my paper with Avi and Joshua, even though we use a very straightforward machine learning model, is sentiment, right? So you have some text. You may want to say, what is this text about? But often you might want to code up this sentiment. Is this positive or negative? And so where do we do this? And I'll just walk you through very quickly how we did this. Avi, Joshua, and I have this recently published paper called Exit Tweets and Loyalty. I'm not going to read you the abstract. It's in AJ Micro. The reason I like this paper for this particular conversation we're having is because it's very much about old theory. When I say old theory, I mean, this is like theory that even before Avi and I went to grad school. So really, really old theory, like Joshua old theory. And I can only poke fun at Joshua. Avi's laughing. I'm just poking fun at Joshua, but he's the one who said, you guys have to read this book. This is what Twitter is all about. So Albert Hirschman, whose name you might recognize from the HHI, the Hirschman-Herfindahl Index, same Hirschman, wrote this book, I think it's back in the 70s, about exit and voice. And essentially he asked this question, when customers experience an unexpected quality decline, what do? Do they stop buying from the company? That's exit, right? Most of our IO models would say you're going to switch to a competitor, or do they voice? Do they go to the company and say, I'm really unhappy? Do they complain, basically? I'm really unhappy. This wasn't what I expected. I want my money back. I want a refund. He says political science has always thought about the voice option, and economics has always thought about the exit option, but nobody's really put this together to think about what are the different ways we get responses to quality degradation, and how does it vary with market structure or with other features? So we got interested in this very question because what we realized is that Twitter as a platform was increasingly being used for customers to complain to companies. And what that did is it made complaints, which is something that companies keep very near and dear. They don't generally sort of give out to researchers, visible to us as the econometrician. And so what does Hirschman say voice is? He says, just because voice is less, exit is going to be obvious to you guys as economics students, voice is less familiar maybe. Voice is any attempt at all to change, rather than escape from an objectionable state of affairs, whether through individual or collective petition to the management directly in charge, through appeal to a higher authority with the intention of forcing a change in management, or through various types of actions and protests, including those that are meant to mobilize public opinion. And so what we realized is Twitter becomes a new platform for voice, and in turn, a new source of data on voice. And so you can sort of, here we have an example of a tweet to an airline. So let me preview, we do this in the context of tweets to airlines. There's a variety of reasons. One is because a lot of my research had been on airlines, but the other reasons are because, airlines were fairly early to get on Twitter. They all had Twitter, very active Twitter functions. And at the time we wrote this paper, and because we could match the complaints data to objective measure of airline quality through on-time performance data. I'm not going to walk you through all the empirics, but essentially our paper in a nutshell does this. It asks this question: when a customer is faced with a negative quality shock, so when they have poor on-time performance, operational performance by an airline, do they exit, basically say, I'm not going to fly with you anymore, or do they voice? Where voice, used to take the form of people getting up there and complaining, increasingly it's taking the form of tweets. And then we ask how this varies with market structure. So I'm not going to go through the whole paper because that would take the rest of the time. Where does the machine learning come in? One of the things we're interested in is not just counting the amount of tweets, but also measuring the sentiment of tweets on days where the airline has bad performance. And so we use, because we did this quite a number of years ago now, a very simple algorithm that can code up the sentiment of the tweet. And this is how it works. It basically looks for happy face and sad face symbols in tweets. And then it basically uses that to learn what combinations of words are associated with positive or negative tweets, designs a prediction model, and then we can run all of the tweets in our data through that model to get a predicted sentiment score. And you can see it does not a bad job for the extremes. It doesn't do great in the middle, but the tweets that it predicts have, have a probability of being negative of 0.9 or above. You can see, at American Airline, classless, no help flight attendants, airline industry is just so sad. At United, embarrassed to fly with you tonight, multiple points of failure. So I'm not even telling you what our findings are. You can go read the paper if you want. But what's the takeaway for you guys from this? We took an old question that fully lacked systematic empirical evaluation in the literature. Nobody had really tested Hirschman because nobody had systematic data on complaints on voice that could also be matched with systematic data on actual quality. You don't just want to look at complaints, because some people just complain, even when quality isn't bad. And so nobody had figured out how to do this. We took advantage of a new source of data, Twitter, which made something that was previously not public, namely complaints, observable to us, the econometricians. And we took advantage of new techniques, sentiment analysis done by algorithms, to create variables from that data which would not otherwise be possible if done by hand on the scale of data we had. So we had 4 million tweets, a little bit more. So we never could have hired enough RAs to code up the sentiment of 4 million tweets. So for us, it was the intersection of a new source of data from the digital platform Twitter with the new techniques that allowed us to say, on a large scale, capable of doing sort of econometric analysis, is a company receiving more and more voice on a day, and is that voice increasingly negative? And so what I want you to take away is that new digital data sources, often will provide an opportunity to apply these new, machine learning based techniques. But I would also say, I think they're relevant to lots of old data sources too. So if I were to brainstorm some of the sources of data where the application of machine learning might take even just text or images and turn them into variable, there's tons of things. So, you might think about job descriptions. If you're a labor economist or a personnel economist, trying to think about characteristics of jobs, and where would you get those characteristics? Well, what if you had all the job postings and there's a way to use machine learning to code up certain characteristics? Or performance evaluations, court transcripts, email text, social media connections, calendars, the type of data that health trackers and wearables might generate. All of these give us an opportunity to take things that didn't fit in the rows and columns that we're used to working with, apply machine learning, generate new variables, and potentially answer a new set of questions. Okay, I'm going to sort of power through to make sure I get through everything, and then I'm going to try to leave a few minutes for questions. So part 2, and this I'm going to do relatively short, is new technology may open new types of questions. And so here again, like I said, I really just want to introduce this idea, if you haven't read it, of prediction policy problems. Traditionally, I think we thought of most policy problems as causal inference problems. Should I do X? Well, to know if I should do X, I have to know what happens to Y if I do X, relative to the counterfactual of not doing X. And the hard part was always sort of figuring out an identification strategy to credibly estimate that counterfactual. And lots of examples of the types of problems that fit this structure. Kleinberg, Ludwig, Mullainathan, and Obermeyer introduced this idea of prediction policy problems. And essentially, they set it up like this. And again, I just sort of took the excerpt for you. We don't need to read it. But they say, consider a policymaker that must choose X to maximize a payoff pi, where pi is a function of both Y and X. They said that, the classical causal inference problem is all about estimating how X impacts Y, and then we understand the mapping from Y to the payoff function. The prediction policy problem typically assumes away a causal relationship between X and Y and wants to know directly impacts the payoff, but the challenge is that the impact of X on the payoff depends on Y. and we don't know why. So if we can predict why, we can make better decisions around X. So that all sounds very abstract. What are the types of examples that they give that fit this prediction policy problem? You know, so the trivial example they start off with in their paper is, you know, do I carry an umbrella, right? Should I carry an umbrella? You know, what's my payoff to carrying an umbrella depends fundamentally on whether it's going to rain, right? And so this becomes a prediction problem. If I can predict whether it's going to rain, I can make a much better decision about whether or not to carry an umbrella. Does a patient receive hip replacement surgery? So we know how hip replacement surgery impacts, you know, patient outcomes. We know the cost of it, but the challenge is you don't want to give this surgery to anybody who's going to die within a few months of the surgery, both because it's expensive and because sort of the first few months after the surgery are very unpleasant. And so knowing whether to give a particular patient this surgery depends on our prediction of how long they're going to survive. The third example they give is, should a defendant be released on bail before trial, right? So again, we know sort of the costs associated with releasing and not releasing, but the decision of whether to release depends on whether we think they're going to do bad stuff when we release them. What do we mean by bad stuff? We mean they're either going to reoffend or they're going to flee. And so again, if we have a prediction of that, then we can make our X not decision better. And so this is just, you know, as far as I can tell, we were so focused, we as a profession, on sort of causal inference type policy problems. We didn't really think that there's a whole bunch of policy problems where the primary input is in fact a better prediction. Okay, and with that, let me turn to the third part, which is we have this new technology. We're inherently interested in the effects of the new technology on economic outcomes. And I know in your lecture with Avi this morning and with Eric, I'm sure this is sort of mostly what they were getting at. But I have a few things I think I want to add here, because it's easy to get caught up in trying to, you know, think about these things, and we want to do it in a smart way. So this question of what are the effects of a new technology on economic outcomes, we usually have three ways to answer this. First, we might develop some theory, right? We may have theories about how AI is going to replace certain jobs and what types of jobs, and then as a result, who's going to be unemployed, and we may have theories about that. Or we may have theories about how pricing by an algorithm is going to be different than pricing by a human, and what's going to happen. We may do structural estimation that's designed specifically to simulate certain counterfactual scenarios. Or we may carry out reduced form estimates of the causal effects of adopting the new technology. And that's what I'm going to spend the most time on, because that's the type of research that I've always done, so I'm most familiar with it. So reduced form estimation of the causal effects of a new technology. How do we usually do this? Well, we find a setting where the new technology has been adopted, right? Increasingly, we try to do this in very narrow settings where we can trace out the effects on particular margins of performance, because these things have proven to be hard to just measure in the aggregate. Like, what are the effects of computers, or what are the effects of AI in the aggregate? We have to identify an outcome or a set of outcomes that should be impacted by the new technology, given our theoretical understanding of what the new technology does. Then we need to develop an identification strategy for estimating the counterfactual. We can measure what happened after the new technology was adopted, but we need to compare that to what would have happened had it not been adopted. And then we estimate the effects of the new technology. So there's tons of examples in the literature from this. I've just got sort of headlines of two that I like for sort of personal reasons. So old paper from Susan Athey and Scott Stern, The Impact of Information Technology on Emergency Healthcare Outcomes. This was the first paper I ever RA'd on, which is why it has a special place in my heart. And this paper very much follows that approach I just told you. They picked a very specific setting where information technology had been adopted in 911 systems by adopting what was called an E911, enhanced 911, that gave additional information about the caller to the dispatcher, okay? And they identified a very specific outcome they could measure, which is mortality associated with heart attacks, right? So if E911 gets ambulances places faster and those patients get to hospital faster, we should see improved survival rates. And they pick specifically heart attacks because that's somewhere where timeliness matters. And then they do the same thing. They use different counties, and I think in Pennsylvania it was, some adopted, some didn't. They adopted at different times, and they essentially look for this sort of this differential change in survival rates and length of stay and other things. The other paper is Avi's paper with a few co-authors on the adoption of electronic medical records. Same idea, specific technology, specific setting. We understand the margin of performance, or as they understand the margin of performance, which is hospital operating costs. We have an identification strategy. Some hospitals adopt, some don't. They adopt at different times. We have the data. What happens? This is how we typically think about what is the impact of a new technology. So now with that in mind, I want to tell you about two papers that were presented last year, one of which was the credit scoring paper I asked you guys to look at. This isn't it. So this was a paper I didn't ask you to read, but let me tell you about it and you'll see why I'm contrasting it to that paper. So this paper, Machine Learning, Human Experts, and the Value of Real Assets, asked this question. They didn't phrase it like this, but I rephrased it because this really is the question. What happens when we replace a primitive prediction technology with a more sophisticated, i.e. machine learning based one? Their setting was art auctions, which is kind of interesting. They say auction houses have human experts who form, before every auction, who form a low and a high estimate for each item, and that's shared with bidders. So it's kind of meant to anchor the bids that come in. Essentially, you can think of these as their predictions of the sale price, okay? So that's what I mean by a primitive prediction technology. They have data from over 1 million paintings from 371 auction houses, and they essentially compare 4 prediction technologies. The humans, right, which they have. Then they take the data and run a hedonic regression for the price. Then they use a machine learning model without an image of the piece of art. And then they use a machine learning model with an image. So what do they find? They find in general, the human is better than the machine learning model, which outperforms the hedonic model at predicting the actual sale price. Now, that doesn't really mean the human is better because the bidders had the human's estimates. It's not surprising that the correlation between those two is the strongest. They find the machine learning prediction adds explanatory power after controlling for the human prediction, suggesting the machine learning is picking up something the human doesn't. They look specifically where the machine learning prediction adds explanatory power in the regression of the actual price on the human prediction. And they say, you know, it's particularly useful for artists with more variability in their prices in the past and artists who had low prices in the recent past. So what they're trying to get at here is kind of what are the mistakes the human predictors are making. And they say that they show that the algorithm can predict whether a painting will be over or underestimated by the auction house, which means the human expert's mistakes are systematic. They can predict with machine learning when the human is going to get it wrong, suggesting there's something systematic in those errors. Okay, that's the paper. I'm going to sort of stop there for a minute. The other paper that was presented in the same session was this one, Predictably Unequal, the Effects of Machine Learning on Credit Markets. They essentially ask the same question, but with a bit of an expansion. So they say, what happens to credit market outcomes when we replace a primitive prediction technology with a more sophisticated machine learning based one? And then they go on to ask and say, and how does this vary across race groups? Their setting is credit markets, specifically mortgages, and what's going on. And where's the prediction here? Lenders predict the likelihood a borrower will default on a loan, which then influences the decision of whether to offer the borrower a loan and at what rate. They have data on over 9 million mortgages, and they do a similar thing. They horse race different prediction technologies, right? They don't have a human. They don't have a human prediction, but they use a linear logit, a non-linear logit, and a machine learning model. Their paper has 3 steps. First, they have a theoretical model to even say why would changes in the technology impact predictions and in turn impact different groups. Then they go through the empirical exercise of basically predicting default with these different technologies, and they show kind of who the winners and the losers are. So what does it mean to be a winner? It means the new technology predicts that you're more creditworthy than the old technology did. Being a loser from this technology means the new technology downgraded you, right? You're not as good a risk as they would have thought. And then they embed these predictions in an equilibrium model of competition between lenders to determine the equilibrium outcomes in terms of mortgage offers, acceptances, and interest rates, and they compare that across groups. Sorry, I think I'm getting Slack notifications from another channel, sorry. So what are their key findings? Machine learning models improve the accuracy of predictions. It leads to winners and losers that are unequally distributed across race groups. I'm going through this quickly because I'm not interested in the particular findings. There's sort of a series of other points I want to make. And then once they embed these predictions in an equilibrium model of offers and rates, they basically show a series of kind of more downstream effects, which, overall more borrowers get accepted for mortgages, which is good. But different race groups are impacted differently, and the within group dispersion changes differently for different groups. Okay, so 3 things I want to draw out from these studies. First, I want to get you thinking about what do we think the earliest applications of machine learning will be, because they're probably not the ones we're mostly talking about at this conference. 2, I want to highlight this isn't our typical way of measuring the impact of a new technology. It actually doesn't fit that structure I laid out for you at the beginning of this section. And what's our comparative advantage here as economists? Where should we be playing, essentially? So what will be the early applications of machine learning? A lot of the attention around AI right now is focused on job replacement. I mean, that was right, at least one of the topics today. What are the tasks and jobs that will be replaced or changed by AI? We can think of these as jobs that don't look like prediction problems, but with sophisticated enough AI might be. So nobody thinks of radiologists as a prediction technology, but they kind of are. We don't think of truck drivers as doing prediction, but they could be. We don't think of airline customer service agents as being involved in prediction, but we can automate it with AI-enabled bots. But the most immediate applications of machine learning should be existing prediction problems where machine learning can replace a more primitive prediction technology. So like anything where a company was already doing data analysis to predict something with a simple statistical methodology, that's probably the first place that company is going to be implementing machine learning. Because in those scenarios, machine learning-based predictions can be relatively easily integrated into existing jobs and workflows. So last year at the conference, we had a speaker at lunchtime who leads AI at one of the big Canadian banks. And he didn't spend his lunch talking about how AI was replacing, bank tellers, even though that's the one we're more worried about. He spent his time talking about credit models and predicting who should get, a credit card and all of the standard banking or finance related prediction problems. Okay. So even though as economists, we need to think about those sort of big questions about jobs and inequality, the immediate implications is not going to be replacing lots of AI is going to be applied in businesses before truck drivers start getting replaced by AI. And so I just wanted to make that point because that's probably the first place we should start studying this. It's the first place we're going to be able to get data. Second, this approach I just described to you doesn't really fit our typical empirical approach, right? So if you were to ask what happens when a primitive prediction technology is replaced with a more sophisticated one, we think through these stages. We say, okay, the firm uses a prediction technology, they generate a prediction, that prediction is an input to some decision, right? The firm makes the decision, other agents make decisions in response to that decision, equilibrium outcomes and payoffs are realized. And usually we think about kind of the link between a technology, I'm pointing, you can't, I don't know if you, the technology and equilibrium outcomes. So like the paper on, on electronic health records, Avi's paper that I just talked about, the firm chooses a new technology. In this case, it's not a prediction technology, it's an information technology, electronic medical health records. A whole bunch of stuff happens that we don't look at, and they measure the equilibrium outcome they care about, which are cost per patient, right? That's usually how we would do this. That's not what these papers do, right? Instead, these papers have the data the firms would have, and the authors themselves apply machine learning to the firm's prediction problems. The companies in the art auctions and the banks, they weren't using machine learning, right? They used the old prediction technology, the humans or the Loja regressions, right? We, or they, the author said, hey, let me apply the new technology and see what happens. Right? But the difference between the two papers is that the art paper essentially stops at this red arrow. They basically say what happens when we use a new prediction technology. Oh, we get better predictions. That's a little bit interesting, right? The other paper says what happens to predictions, then what happens to our decision to offer a mortgage. How does that interact with competing banks' decisions? Who accepts those, and what happens to the equilibrium economic outcomes that we care about? And so, sort of 2 points to take away from this. One is this technology seems to be a bit unique in that we can actually, because it's applied to data, we can actually get the data and apply it even when the companies aren't, right? Like if you think about the 911 paper I talked about, that would be like, the authors, saying, give me all the calls that came in, and I'm going to reroute your ambulances and figure out how quickly an ambulance would have gotten to each patient, and then how quickly each patient got to a hospital, and then who lived and died, as opposed to waiting for the companies to implement it. This seems to be a little bit unique because the technology is applied to data, that we may be able to do this different approach. This second point, and I'm going to build on this, is where should we be focusing? We should be focusing here, right? What's our comparative advantage here as economists? We should study the adoption of machine learning as a replacement prediction technology, but we should be focusing not just on, how much better do predictions get, right? We don't care about better predictions. We care about how better predictions lead to different decisions and different outcomes. Better predictions in and of themselves are not something we really care about. We should be focusing here. Let the computer scientists and the statisticians worry about how much better predictions get when we horse race these different technologies. The things that we're good at is understanding how those better predictions work through decision-making, and we have good models of decision-making to impact outcomes, and then in turn, how those effects feed back into the incentives to adopt in the first place. And so our comparative advantage is not this horse racing of prediction technologies. We're good at thinking about decision-making and equilibrium outcomes that result from those decisions. Therefore, you should focus on how and when will upgrading a prediction technology generate changes in equilibrium outcomes, and what are the welfare implications of these? It's tempting to just get excited by showing that predictions change, but I wouldn't want you to stop there because we don't actually care that much about that. And then the second thing I would say, that follows on that, since we are good at thinking about decisions, is this question of what factors influence how the new technology impacts market outcomes. So what factors affect sort of, the path from adopting the new technology to the outcomes? For example, does market structure matter? Do asymmetries between firm matters? Does differential access to the new prediction technology matter? So more generally, and I think this is my last slide before a summary, some of the ways I think you guys can add value as economists studying machine learning, are here. Here are 3 of them. So 1, if machine learning is an improvement in prediction technology, and if predictions are inputs to decisions, how do decisions change as predictions improve? And what are the effects of those changes in decisions? Consider the improvement in technology in the relevant economic model, right? So how do these changes in prediction leading to different decisions work through, let's say, the organization, or work through a market, right? So one application of prediction is in hiring decisions, right? It's not enough to just show that if we apply machine learning to screening of resumes, we hire different people. We want to apply what we understand from personnel economics and organizational economics about what that means. What does that mean, whether it's for the hierarchy of the organization? What does it mean for career concerns? What does it mean? But we don't want to stop and say, oh, different people are hired. We don't really care about that. Point 2, if machine learning is an improvement in prediction technology, we think it is, and if predictions are input decisions, which they are, what are the incentives of decision makers to act on the improved predictions? That's another place we can add value, right? If these predictions only work through different decisions, decisions are made by people, and we know there's lots of complexity around how decisions get made. First of all, incentives. Right? Think about the application of machine learning technologies in a whole bunch of healthcare settings. Which decision maker in a healthcare setting has the incentive to act on some health-based prediction is going to depend fundamentally on who's compensated for what and who pays for what. We see this all the time in the creative destruction lab. We have all of these great AI-based health companies who are predicting, the optimal treatment path for cancer patients. And all of the mentors say to them, that's great, I believe you can do this, but who cares? Who's going to pay for this, right? Are you lowering costs? Are you improving patient outcomes? Is the hospital going to pay because it's cheaper? Is the insurance company going to pay because treatments are going to be shorter? we're good at thinking about that intersection with incentives and even beyond incentives with other sort of behavioral considerations, right? How do you get doctors to change their behavior? It turns out a lot of the insights from behavioral economics about how you display information matters. And then finally, you know, we can't talk about the effects of new technologies without talking about complements. What are the necessary complements in order for machine learning to generate better predictions and for those predictions to actually influence decision makers? So with that, let me, you know, I think, you know, it's only an hour. You barely need a summary after an hour because I just told you this sort of 55 minutes ago. What do I think some of the opportunities are for you as economic researchers from machine learning? The first is these opportunities around new statistical tools. And again, it should always be about what can I study better than before, or what can I study that we couldn't study before. The biggest return in a job market paper, I personally believe this is, this question has been out there and everybody has struggled to make progress on it. And I have figured out a way to answer it, right? I think as a young economist, you get more credit for providing sort of the best available answer to a big question that nobody has answered than a slightly more precise answer to a question that 10 people have already tried to answer. But that's a taste thing. So I won't say that's true for everybody. Second, new technology, turns out there's a new set of questions that technology is really well suited for answering. And there's a huge opportunity to influence policy for the better if we start sort of picking off those prediction policy problems. And then finally, new technology, I think likely a general purpose technology, what are the effects of this technology on economic outcomes? And everybody has a piece here. The sociologists, the legal scholars, everybody. AI is so widespread, everybody has a piece. Focus on the piece that we have a comparative advantage.